Greetings, magical people. I am so grateful that so many new people have discovered my channel in the past couple of months, and I realize there's probably a few different camps of people watching these videos, and I wanted to address as many of them as possible in this video. Are you a manifestation enthusiast who's curious if there's any aspects of the witchcraft path that could benefit you? Or are you a beginner witch wondering where to begin your magical journey? Or perhaps you've been dabbling in the craft a little or a lot, and you're looking to bridge the gap between your spiritual practice and the goals you have for your real life. I have been in all three of those places in my now 8+ years of exploring the magical path. And in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you my most groundbreaking tips on how to plant, tend, and harvest your desires using a combination of witchcraft and manifestation hacks. So if you're curious how you can simplify your manifestation practice and make this next year your most magical year yet, let's dive in and make some magic. If you would like to follow along with what we're going to be talking about in this video and take some notes on some absolutely gorgeous pages that I've designed for you, then I invite you to go to the link below and download your free printable Wheel of the Year cheat sheet, which includes beautiful note sheets so that you can write down what you're learning and take note of the parts that actually resonate with you in particular. So without further ado, let's talk about the Wheel of the Year. So first things first, what is the calendar of the witches? In its most basic form, the Wheel of the Year is simply the solstices and the equinoxes. There are 2 of each. So the winter solstice is the shortest day and the longest night of the year, taking place around December 21st in the northern hemisphere and June 21st in the southern hemisphere. The spring equinox is the halfway point between the winter solstice and the summer solstice, when the hours of daylight and the hours of darkness are equal. Here, the days begin to grow longer than the nights. It takes place around March 21st in the northern hemisphere and September 21st in the southern hemisphere. The summer solstice is the longest day and the shortest night of the year, taking place around June 21st in the northern hemisphere and December 21st in the southern hemisphere. And finally, the autumn equinox is another time of equal day and equal nighttime hours, but this time the nights begin to grow longer than the days. It takes place around September 21st in the northern hemisphere and March 21st in the southern hemisphere. So when you put those together into a circular calendar diagram, you get the Wheel of the Year. Pretty much every ancient culture around the world has incorporated the recognition of these seasonal checkpoints into their spirituality and culture in some way. This is because in the ancient world, people didn't have modern heating and cooling systems or freezers for their food, so their survival was entirely dependent on planning to plant, tend, harvest, and preserve their resources each year. Naturally, this directly influenced their spiritual beliefs and practices because, at the end of the day, all spirituality originates from our human need to feel supported by our environment. So here's a magical tip for you. If you're curious to discover if your spiritual practice resonates with the seasons, try just exploring some of the traditions associated with the solstices and equinoxes in the area where you live. I've lived in New York for my whole life, so I resonate with the Northern Hemisphere dates for the Wheel of the Year very strongly, as we have all 4 seasons here. So at least from a seasonal perspective, the traditional Northern Hemisphere themes for the seasons work well for me. So why are there now 8 Sabbats of the witches? You may have noticed that modern witches tend to celebrate 8 times of the year rather than just the 4 explained above. This is because the Celtic neo-pagan religion of Wicca has influenced a lot of the customs of modern-day witchcraft. It's Celtic neo-paganism that brought the cross-quarter celebrations into the mix. Cross-quarters are simply the halfway marks between a solstice and an equinox. It's believed that the ancient Celts celebrated these in-between times because they represented the high point of each season, whereas the solstices and equinoxes marked the beginning of each season. The Celtic cross quarters are Imbolc, Beltane, Lunasa, and Samhain. Imbolc is the halfway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox, and in the northern hemisphere it's celebrated around February 1st. Beltane is the halfway point between the spring equinox and the summer solstice, and it's celebrated around May 1st in the northern hemisphere. Lunasa is the halfway point between the summer solstice and the autumn equinox, and it's celebrated around August 1st in the northern hemisphere. And lastly, Samhain is the halfway point between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice, and it's celebrated around November 1st in the northern hemisphere. Here's a little witchy tip for you. If you're fairly new to the whole world of witchy paths, it's a common misconception that witch and Wiccan mean the same thing, and that only Wiccans are entitled to celebrating the Wheel of the Year. But this is far from the truth. A witch is simply a person who works with their intuition and the forces of nature to create intentional changes in their life. Even though they're not all traditionally called witches, these kinds of people have existed in literally every time, place, and culture throughout human history. Another common misconception is that Wicca is an ancient religion. In fact, Wicca was invented in the 20th century by a man named Gerald Gardner, who gathered ideas about ancient Celtic culture and kind of mushed them together into a reimagined version of what he wanted to believe his ancestors may have done. People like Gardner fought to have witchcraft legalized by having Wicca recognized as a legitimate religion that could be protected under law via freedom of religion. So even though not all witches are Wiccan, many of us have a lot of respect and appreciation for that religion because it helped to reintroduce the world to pagan concepts, and it also helped with witches' rights in general. So why do some witches celebrate the Celtic pagan Sabbats even if they're not Wiccan? Well, there's a lot of different reasons why a witch might choose to do anything, including celebrating the cross quarters. Witches are all unique and different, and many of us like to cherry pick from a variety of different cultural traditions from all around the world, Wicca being no exception. In the Western-influenced world, many people whose ancestral customs were taken away through cultural conditioning and colonization of any kind have rediscovered witchcraft through being introduced to Wicca in the 20th century. And likewise, people who do consider themselves Wiccan also borrow aspects of totally different cultures' magic, making the religion attractive to colonized peoples whose ancestral cultures have been or can be reasonably incorporated into the overall concept of Wicca. So what we have now are Wiccans who practice witchcraft traditions from all over the world, as well as witches who are not part of the Wicca religion who have adopted traditionally Wiccan traditions into their practice as well. If you're wondering, personally, I am not Wiccan, but I do incorporate all 8 seasons because to me, it's just such a darn good idea. By remembering to turn to the seasons for wisdom 8 times a year rather than just 4, it's helpful to stay closer tuned into the energies of nature. And since my path is often about using seasonal checkpoints as opportunities to plan out the planting, tending, and harvesting of my goals and manifestations, why not check in as often as possible? Another reason many witches today use all 8 Sabbats is because in modern society, it happens to be some of the cross-quarter festivals that have survived from ancient times all the way through the years of Christian suppression of the old ways. Therefore, many of us are already accustomed to tuning into the themes of those holidays like Halloween, which is a Christianized and then later secularized version of Samhain. Here's a witchy tip for you. Wondering if it makes sense for you to celebrate the cross quarters? Admittedly, when I first started my Wheel of the Year journey, I wasn't sure how to connect to the cross quarters because I identify as African American, and it felt a bit odd to be celebrating in these Celtic neo-pagan ways. A lot of it didn't seem relatable or necessarily appropriate, but parts of it rang true for me, so I decided to further explore those parts in my own natural way and to respectfully honor and leave behind the rest. Interestingly though, a DNA ancestry test years later showed that my family is actually 36% European and possibly from Celtic and Nordic origins. So maybe on some energetic level, that's part of the reason I felt so deeply drawn to the Wheel of the Year, including the cross quarters. But that's neither here nor there. It's my honest belief that all Earthlings, regardless of where your traceable DNA came from, are naturally attuned to the cycles of the seasons. It's a universal law that applies to everyone in some way, shape, or form. It's for these reasons that I personally choose to use the more open-ended names for cross quarters rather than the Celtic names. So for Imbolc, that would be February's Eve, Beltane would be May's Eve, Lunasa would be August's Eve, and Samhain would be November's Eve. Witches and pagans from all walks of life celebrate various combinations of the Sabbats, and you can feel into what works for you on your own unique, authentic path. So how can observing the witch's calendar benefit you in real life? You might be thinking, that's all super fascinating, but what do I do with that information? Well, I'm so glad you asked. This is where my passion and expertise as a witch really comes into play. Once upon a time, I was a wandering spiritual seeker with a strong intuition, but no real sense of direction in life. I had been dabbling in things like meditation for inner peace, tarot cards to read the energy of a situation, the law of attraction to manifest a more fulfilling life, and even moon phases to track my physical energy as well as my energetic manifestation power. But for some reason, none of that really seemed complete on its own. I found the moon phases hard to keep up with in my busy life, and I didn't know why I was still experiencing so many mood swings and inconsistency in my manifestation efforts throughout the year. I was feeling like I was generally headed in the right direction, but I was having a really hard time feeling truly centered, grounded, and empowered. I kind of felt like I was lacking guidance, but there was no one person or group that I felt had all of the answers that I personally needed all rolled into one. I wished that the clouds would just open up and the universe would hand me a blueprint for a roadmap for my life. Spoiler alert, it did. One busy late summer day, I noticed a changing leaf on the tree outside my office window. And it occurred to me that I had been so busy trying to learn and manifest all of the things that I had barely been honoring the passing of the seasons, which had always made me feel intuitively connected even as a small child. I looked at the calendar for that day and saw the small print, Autumn Equinox. And almost as if I was recalling a deep sense of truth that had always been there hiding in the background, I remembered that the concept of solstices and equinoxes had always inspired me for some reason. I decided to do a quick online search. What is the spiritual significance of the autumn equinox? And that led to articles about the Wheel of the Year, which became my obsession instantly. I began reading, watching, and listening to everything I could find on the subject, and I discovered that some witches based their entire spiritual practice around the seasonal checkpoints. Even though I was out of my element with some of the Celtic religious beliefs that I was reading about, I felt so at home with the concept of seasonal living and connecting to nature in a cyclical way. There weren't many resources on it at the time, or even today, that I found, but the aspect of the Wheel of the Year that spoke to my soul the most was this idea of the plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle as it pertains to our manifestation journey. Having entered the witchy space at a time in my life when I was carving out new paths for myself in everything from spirituality to relationships to career options, I needed a sense of structure that I could count on to plan my life around. The wheel provided that for me, and I began to feel more stable and grounded, and I noticed that I was manifesting my goals with a lot more consistency and having a lot more fun along the way. So here's a witchy tip for you. Use your phone's calendar app. If you're looking for a tangible way to connect to the energies of the seasons in your manifestation journey, start by marking the dates of the seasonal checkpoints in your calendar with an alarm or a reminder. You can begin your seasonal practice by simply checking in with your thoughts and feelings and observing your own life at these 8 checkpoints. These Sabbats can also be the perfect times to celebrate what you've manifested thus far over the course of the year and set new intentions for the seasons ahead. Here's how to celebrate the witchy holidays, whether or not you resonate with the Celtic style. These days there's a lot more online resources sharing about how a solitary practitioner, or a witch without a group or coven, can connect with the wheel of the year alone. But back in the day, I had to use just my own intuition and a few borrowed ideas here and there to discover how the observation of these checkpoints really fit into my life and spiritual practice. Even today, it's easy to find YouTube videos and TikToks about what colors to decorate with, what foods to cook, what gods and goddesses to represent on your altar. But it's still often unclear how any of those fun little practices can actually help you improve your everyday life and achieve your greater goals. Well, that's where I come in, because for the past 8 years, this has been my obsession. The fact is, a witch, or a spiritual person in general, doesn't have to believe in gods and goddesses, or to even have an altar, in order to harness the healing and creative powers of the seasonal energies. You don't have to know the history or traditions that are typically associated with ancient paganism from any culture to harmonize your life with the seasons of nature. Those things can be really helpful for inspiration, but most of it is speculation, and a lot of it might not make any sense for you in your current lifestyle. To me, a witch is someone who listens to their intuition about how to connect to the natural cycles of the universe as they create their desired reality with the elements that are available to them in this life. I believe that magic is having the power to write your own story. And it's for this reason that I've created a fun and practical system for manifesting my ideal lifestyle through seasonal living. So here's another witchy tip for you. Seek answers from within. Are you wondering how to celebrate each season? Start by asking yourself what each season represents to you right now. What memories, feelings, and ideas come up when you think about each time of the year? Chances are you already have subtle rituals or traditions that you naturally gravitate to, whether you're consciously aware of it or not. Like when I was a child, I would always look for the first autumn leaf and collect leaves to press in my journals. Or in the early winter, I would anxiously await the first snowflake to fall and would decorate by cutting out little paper snowflakes and decorating my room with them to mark the beginning of the season. Of course, I had no knowledge of neo-paganism at the time, and in fact, I considered myself a member of an Abrahamic religion as a child. But when I learned what solstices and equinoxes were, I began marking them in my calendars and my journals and marking the day in some personally meaningful way. These kinds of little rituals, as well as our dominant memories and feelings about seasons, can tell us a lot about who we are, what we desire, and how to honor our evolving journey as we manifest our next level lives. So here's where it gets real. When I learned how to start a grimoire or book of shadows based on the witch's calendar. When I first started my year in a day journey, I began by taking notes in a journal about the interesting things I was learning online about the seasonal energies. And then the second year, I used those notes to find 3 main themes of each season and I turned those 3 themes into journal prompts that I could use to discover more about myself as I continued to release old toxic patterns in my life and replace them with healthier and more fulfilling ones. I also had my very first real garden that year, and when I looked at the seasonal themes all together, I realized they perfectly mimicked this plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle over the span of each year. The winter solstice is a time of pausing to process the events of the last year and taking a rest to receive the blessings you've manifested and give yourself a clean slate for the new year. February's Eve is getting into a self-care routine or establishing a daily ritual that consistently connects you with your desires, values, and intentions for the year. The spring equinox is a time of getting more clear on what you desire to create, making any announcements or declarations about them, and beginning to make more tangible plans. May's Eve is a time to start taking more tangible action on your goals and intentions and beginning to make it a bigger, more real part of your lifestyle. The summer solstice is about celebrating your courage for the lifestyle shifts you've made thus far and giving yourself a big pat on the back. August's Eve is a time to check in with where you're at with your goals and ask yourself what needs to shift as the second half of the year gets well underway, possibly rerouting to be more aligned with your intentions. The autumn equinox is a time to acknowledge and be grateful for the results you've created thus far, and to start deciding how these manifestations can be set up to continue supporting you even more going forward. And lastly, November's Eve is a time to do a sort of final roundup of how your year went, and most importantly, to release yourself from any unaligned commitments, toxic coping patterns, or stale belief systems that you may have picked up along the way. Witchy tip for you. Grab your printable Sabbats planner. I've created a Modern Witches calendar grimoire for you because journaling through the wheel of the year helped me to achieve so many of my goals for my career, my finances, my emotional healing, my relationships, and so much more. So I've decided to turn my favorite journal prompts that I came up with into gorgeous pages that you can download and print out to use for yourself. If you're a witchy or witchy curious person, chances are you've asked yourself, what is a book of shadows or grimoire really? And maybe you've tried to figure out how to create one for yourself. It can actually be quite daunting even for the craftiest ones of us. When I first started my path, I felt like I should have a grimoire since journaling is such a natural part of my lifestyle. But I had no idea where to start making a proper book of shadows or what to put in that book that would actually be relevant to my real life. And I was anxious about the possibility of drawing out a lovely page layout and then messing something up or writing down something that wouldn't end up resonating with me in the future. That's why I eventually discovered that I could design printable layouts and use them to record my authentic thoughts, feelings, and experiences as I explored the Wheel of the Year and explored my magical path. And now I'm inviting you to create a fun journal of your own using my prompts and printable layouts. If you want to try some for free, just drop your email address at the link below and I'll send you my Manifesting with the Wheel of the Year cheat sheet. Or if you want to dive in with both feet, you can purchase the full printable journaling kit, which includes information pages, illustrations, as well as lots of prompts and space to write about your own experience. Alright, so let's recap what we've explored so far in this video. The Wheel of the Year is the calendar that most witches use to connect with the energies of the seasons. The popular use of the 8 Sabbat calendar by most modern witches is a combination of the solstices, the equinoxes, and the Celtic-inspired cross-quarter celebrations, which are the high points of the 4 seasons. You don't have to be Wiccan or of Celtic ancestry to benefit from living a seasonal lifestyle. It's a natural law that applies to all creatures. And when we align ourselves with it in a way that resonates with us on a personal level, there is nothing we can't achieve. The themes of the seasons can be used to help you plant, tend, and harvest your intentions, and to compost or recycle any stale vibes for a fresh start in the next year. You don't have to celebrate the Sabbats in any prescribed way. The seasonal energies can be most empowering to work with when you use them to better understand who you truly are and who you wish to become. Make your year and a day adventure easy, fun, and effective by using the themes of the seasons to create a journal or planner for your desires, intentions, and manifestations. So, what inspired you most about the ideas we talked about in this video? Are you a new witch or a witchy curious person getting ready to embark on your first seasonal journey? Or are you a seasoned witch about to supercharge your year with these simplified manifesting tips? I would love to hear about your experience in the comments, and I would also love to know what you think of these free printable journaling pages that I made for you. I'm planning on creating a lot more printables in the year ahead, so I would love to know if this is something that excites you at all. Thank you so much for being your magical self, and until next time, blessed be.